On this Sunday night, a first-hand look at the fire-ravaged ruins of Jasper.
This is the main drag here in Jasper.
How some buildings came so close to being reduced to ashes. Israel's revenge for a deadly rocket strike.
Stop the war.
New points in sports history. Canada's first Olympic medal ever in fencing. And a crowning achievement for diversity.
Ashley Collingwood!
The first Indigenous woman to win the Miss Universe Canada pageant.
Global National, reporting tonight. Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It will be a long and difficult road to recovery, but today there is new help for the people of Jasper. More firefighters are arriving and the Alberta and federal governments both say they'll match private donations to help rebuild. That means $3 for every dollar Canadians put forward. And today we learn more about the intense firefight to save at least part of the town, as members of the media, including Global's Jayme Doll, were escorted into the fire zone.
Well, Monday will mark 1 week since that wildfire forced out 17,000 Jasper residents and tourists. And for the first time, we're going to jump on this bus and we're going to get a first-hand look at the destruction it left behind.
For a lot of people to witness what's happened to a place that we love so much. So we do have a mental health expert with us. He's following in a car behind the bus.
Is there still hot spots in this one?
Well, probably, for sure. And our biggest thing is trying to get a control line that's clean, at least 100 feet to 300 feet in, wherever we can.
What are we looking at here?
This is where the fire came in around the valley here.
Wow. This is the main drag here in Jasper.
This is Connaught Drive, which is kind of the main throughway from the east to west entrance of town.
What are we seeing here?
So in the initial stages, the Birch restaurant was kind of in the center. That structure ended up catching fire and started spreading to the surrounding structures around it. Above each of those buildings were actually private residential apartments. So as those fires started spreading, one of the tactics was to actually take some heavy equipment in and bring those structures down to kind of contain that. But we needed to do what we could to save the majority of the structures. You
were fighting these fires knowing that your own home was on fire? Did you see your own home burn?
Yes, I did. During my tactical patrols around town, I did see the stages from when my house initially caught fire to kind of throughout.
So we're just adjacent to downtown. In the background, you can see what is left of the Anglican church, and across the street, this is the hospital. You can see just how close this wildfire came to the hospital, but crews worked so hard to save all the critical infrastructure, the hospital, the fire hall right here. I think what's so amazing here is that amongst the rubble and the debris, just next door, there are buildings, livelihoods, businesses that are still standing untouched. And I think what officials really are trying to drive home here is that 70% of this town is still standing. And they want residents to know that despite the long road that lies ahead for them, there is still mountains of hope. Jayme Doll, Global News, Jasper.
The cooler weather has been helping fight many wildfires out west, but evacuation orders have been expanded for one community in southeast BC. Residents in more than 400 properties around the village of Slocan were told to leave last night, and today people at several properties and a campground nearby were also ordered out. 3 wildfires are burning in the forests around the community. The forecast is calling for warmer temperatures and stronger winds. Voters in Winnipeg and Montreal will choose new MPs in 2 by-elections this September. By-elections don't usually attract much attention, but there is intense pressure on the Liberals to perform after their shocking loss in a long-time Toronto riding last month. Melissa Ridgen is in one of those ridings where Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre happened to be spending the day. Melissa?
Me Too Conservatives had planned an Axe the Carbon Tax rally here in Elmwood-Transcona, knowing this might be the day that the Prime Minister calls a by-election. Pierre Poilievre joining the local candidate here, Colin Reynolds, who is an electrician and a proud union member. This is historically an NDP seat. The late Bill Blakey was the area's member of parliament for 3 decades. His son Daniel has been the MP here for nearly a decade himself. He resigned after the Manitoba NDP formed government last fall, taking on an advisory role with Premier Wab Kinew. But this hasn't always been an orange seat. When Stephen Harper's Conservatives swept to a majority in 2011, this riding went blue, but only until the 2015 election when it flipped back to the NDP. University of Manitoba political scientist Royce Coop says Conservatives smell an opportunity.
Without a Blakey on the ballot, that hurts the NDP, and the truth is that the Conservatives are so high in the polls right now, and as we saw in 2011, the Conservatives can win this seat.
The other election will be in the Montreal riding of LaSalle, Émard, Verdun, which was new in 2015 and has been Liberal held ever since. It's former Justice Minister David Lameddy's seat, who announced earlier this year he was leaving politics after the upset at a by-election last month in Toronto's St. Paul's, which the Liberals lost. All eyes will be on what happens here.
If they lose this seat, recall it after that St. Paul result, it led to just this huge round of rebellion and pontificating about Trudeau's leadership. Was he going to step aside? If they lose this seat, that'll happen again, and it'll be much worse.
Voters in both ridings will select their choice on September 16th. Me too.
Melissa Ridgen in Winnipeg. Thanks, Melissa. A frightening act of violence threw a popular Halifax festival into chaos last night. Shots rang out at the city's annual Africville reunion, injuring 5 people. One is in life-threatening condition. As Emma Convey reports, the incident has rattled the community.
When we come back to Africville once a year, we come back home. And when our home is disturbed, we're disturbed.
This was supposed to be a night of celebration for the 41st annual Africville reunion. But the festivities came to an abrupt halt when shots were fired into the crowd, striking 5 bystanders and sending attendees running for their lives.
This horrendous act took place by no former residents of Africville, and we're furious and we're hurt, and I am livid that my grandchildren, my nieces and my nephews had to go through that last night. It was like being in a war zone.
Police were called to the scene around 10 p.m. Saturday night, but the gunmen were nowhere to be found.
At this point, we don't have specific suspect information, but certainly we do want to assure the public, and our investigators do believe at this point that we don't believe this to be a random incident. 5 individuals were caught in the crossfire, including 1 teenager.
These young people, and I say young people with a capital Y, came into Africville of all places and started a war. How dare they disrupt something like that?
It's not even so much the events, it's the camaraderie, just that reuniting to let us know that we're still here. This incident was not the doings of Africville people.
The investigation is currently ongoing, and police are asking anyone with information to come forward.
At this point, there is no evidence to suggest that it certainly, the nature of the event had any significance other than the individual that may have been there that was targeted.
My family was in the midst of that gunfire, and yes, I was running towards it. And those bullets were flying all over.
Emma Convey, Global News, Halifax.
In Pickering, Ontario, near Toronto, 1 man has been arrested after an incident at a Durham regional police station. The man entered the building armed with what investigators believe was a pellet gun, leading to a confrontation with police. 2 officers suffered minor injuries. The man was arrested and sent to hospital, though the extent of his injuries is unknown. History has been made for Team Canada at the Paris Summer Olympics. Eleanor Harvey has just become the country's first ever Olympic medalist in fencing. The 29-year-old from Hamilton, Ontario, won bronze, defeating her Italian counterpart in the 3rd-place match of the women's individual foil tonight. It's Canada's 2nd medal so far in the Paris Games. Also in Paris, the growing spying controversy continues to overshadow the performance of Canada's women's soccer team. Today, Canada prevailed in a critical group stage match against the host team, France, but the team still faces an uphill battle after FIFA docked them 6 points from the tournament as punishment. And Federal Sports Minister Carla Qualtrough has announced Sport Canada will now withhold some funding from Canada Soccer related to the 3 officials involved in spying on New Zealand's team using a drone. But Qualtrough says it won't impact overall federal funding for the women's program. And today, head coach Bev Priestman, who's among the 3 officials involved in the spying, issued a statement after FIFA's penalties yesterday. In it, she apologizes to Canada and her team, saying she is absolutely heartbroken for the players. She also says she plans to fully cooperate with FIFA's investigation. FIFA has already suspended Priestman alongside Joseph Lombardi and Jasmine Mander for 1 year. Most of the world's attention in Paris, though, was likely laser-focused on women's gymnastics as American athlete Simone Biles made her long-awaited comeback. The 27-year-old, considered one of the best gymnasts of all time, withdrew from the previous Olympics due to a psychological condition that affected her performance. Now she's back on the mat again, and as Crystal Gamansing reports, some of the world's biggest stars were also eager to see it.
She is the most decorated gymnast in history, and Simone Biles is back. Stars like singer John Legend and his wife, model and TV personality Chrissy Teigen, were front and center to watch Biles. Snoop Dogg wasn't just cheering, but wearing a custom Biles t-shirt. Tom Cruise was mobbed going in and out of Bursar Arena, as was Lady Gaga. But the real star of the show was the woman with 7 Olympic medals and 30 World Championship medals.
So proud of her. We are huge fans. She's just such a great role model. Comeback of the season, so I'm super excited to see what she has in store.
In 2021, Biles stunned the world when she pulled out of the Tokyo Olympics, suffering from what gymnasts call the twisties, causing them to lose their awareness of space and air mid-routine. While this is just a qualifying round for both team finals and individual events, the pressure to perform was sky high. The U.S. sits in first place in the women's team all-round qualifications and moves on to the finals. Canada is in 6th and also moves on to the finals. Ellie Black has competed against Biles for years. She's now the first Canadian artistic gymnast to participate in 4 Olympics. She told Global News before the Games about the pride she feels and the challenge of competing at such a high level.
Because we're going to try and be the best in the world, and so sometimes just reminding yourself that being on the Canadian national team, making it to the Olympics, even making it to the Olympic selection process, is such a big accomplishment.
An interesting note between Black and Biles at Tokyo. Black was actually poised to take the bronze on the beam event. Biles, before she pulled out of Tokyo, competed and won the bronze, leaving Black just off the podium. Neithu?
Crystal Gamansing in Paris tonight. Thanks, Crystal. There are renewed cleanliness concerns over the Seine River, where athletes will swim as part of the triathlon events later this week. A practice run for the events was canceled today after rain in recent days caused pollution levels in the water to spike. But officials say water quality should return to safe levels within the next 24 to 48 hours, with no rain in the forecast. The men's and women's triathlons are scheduled for Tuesday and Wednesday. Israel strikes back. Coming up, how it's retaliating after 12 children and teenagers were killed in an attack on a soccer field. Plus, high stakes in Venezuela's presidential election and the fears of tampering. Israel has fired back in response to yesterday's attack on the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. A field was struck, killing a group of children and teenagers playing soccer. The U.S. Secretary of State says Hezbollah is to blame, but the Iran-backed group is denying responsibility. Redmond Shannon explains what could stop Israel from responding more strongly, and a warning: the images in this story may be difficult to watch.
More dead children. Not Palestinians, but members of the minority Druze religion, living in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights, a territory Israel annexed from Syria 4 decades ago. On Saturday, a rocket hit a soccer field there, killing a group of 12 children and teens. injuring many more. It is the deadliest event on Israeli-controlled territory since the October 7th Hamas attacks. The Iran-backed, Lebanon-based Hezbollah militant group has denied it's to blame, but on Saturday it had claimed it was carrying out other attacks nearby. Israel's defense minister visited the site of the killings Sunday.
Innocent boys and girls, it's just heartbreaking. I told you, Hezbollah is responsible and it will pay a price.
Israel says it struck back at Hezbollah targets deep inside Lebanon, continuing an exchange of fire that began on October 8th last year. International pressure could hold Israel back from a very strong retaliation, according to this former Israeli intelligence official.
It will be done in a frame of something that the Iranians and the Hezbollah could swallow a bitter pill without push to a point where they will have to retaliate in a way that might result in a dynamic of a whole out war.
A scenario the Biden administration says it wants to avoid.
We also don't want to see the conflict escalate. We don't want to see it spread.
This mourner is not so optimistic, saying he doesn't see any light at the end of the tunnel after nearly 10 months of conflict. The same desperation is etched on the faces of people inside war-torn Gaza. Hamas officials say an Israeli airstrike killed 10 people overnight, including a baby. What have the children done to deserve this? Asks the aunt of a dead girl. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Venezuelans are going to the polls today in a highly charged presidential election. This was the scene outside one polling station this morning, with some people fighting before they could cast their ballots. President Nicolas Maduro is fighting too for a third term in power. Polls suggest his chief challenger, Edmundo Gonzalez, could come out on top. But Maduro has vowed victory, in his words, by hook or by crook, fueling fears the vote could be tampered with. He's also warned of what he calls a bloodbath if he loses. A small team of independent election observers is monitoring the results. And to another closely watched political race, the 100-day countdown to the U.S. presidential election has begun, and Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign says it is surging, with $200 million raised within a week.
The day after I announced my candidacy, we saw the best 24 hours of grassroots fundraising in presidential campaign history.
Her campaign momentum was underscored by a successful fundraiser in Massachusetts on Saturday, raising $1.4 million. With widespread Democratic backing and endorsements from key figures, she has become the presumptive nominee. Harris is now focusing on selecting a running mate. Contentious battle ahead. The storm of criticism over California's crackdown on homeless encampments. Communities across Canada have long tried to figure out how to tackle homelessness. In recent months, cities like Vancouver, Edmonton, and Montreal have seen encampments grow under dangerous conditions. Many have been dismantled, leaving people who already have nowhere to go in dire straits. The problem is paralleled in the U.S., and now the state with America's largest homeless population is cracking down. Bianca Fascini explains why and the backlash.
People experiencing homelessness in California now facing another challenge, being forced by the governor to leave their encampments immediately.
It's time to move with urgency at the local level to clean up these sites, to focus on public health and focus on public safety.
An estimated 180,000 people live on the streets in this state alone. The shuttering of their camps leaving many feeling like they have nowhere else to go.
We had nowhere to go. I mean, I'm trying to get my life together, and this is going to really hurt me a lot.
This follows a Supreme Court decision in June, upholding an Oregon city's ban on homeless people sleeping outdoors. It could impact policy across the U.S., as many major cities struggle with homeless populations. California Governor Gavin Newsom's order has been met with plenty of criticism by advocacy groups, who argue criminalizing homelessness only exacerbates the issue. Sean Cartwright, a volunteer with the Unhoused Response Group, has harsh words for him.
He thinks that getting unhoused people off the streets will clean things up, but instead, all these, so many people out here are going to die.
California has the largest population of homeless people in America, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. While the order advises state agencies to connect homeless people with local service providers, it does not guarantee they'll be provided shelter. Bianca Fascini, Global News, Washington.
Breaking barriers and inspiring change. Next, the Indigenous woman making history as Miss Universe Canada.
Your new Miss Universe Canada 2024 is Ashley Collingbull.
A contestant in one of Canada's biggest beauty pageants has made history. Ashley Collingbull from Enoch Cree Nation in Alberta is the first Indigenous woman to be crowned Miss Universe Canada. She is an actor and has been advocating for Indigenous rights for years.
Imagine your daughter, your sister, or your mother went missing and nobody cared to look for them. This is the heartbreaking reality for Indigenous women in our country. Indigenous women.
Collingbull will now go on to represent Canada at the Miss Universe International pageant in Mexico in September. And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is Wascana Park in Regina. Thanks so much for watching and hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.